Okay, before we start, we'll say a parak Tillim at the end, and we're learning L'Zecher Nishmas Yehuda Shimon Zochron Baruch ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe Mordechai Chana Zochron Baruch ben Reb Chaim Yitzchak Zev and Aryeh Lev Zochron Baruch ben Yeshua the Zalman and the Neshama Sharav Aliyah. And we should also learn the Schos for Eretz Yisrael and for those that are kidnapped, and for Besuras Tovas for Klal Yisrael. I just want to, before we start with oven use, counter use, etc., I'm going to try, hopefully, and get through all of it in the next couple of weeks. But it can be confusing. There's a lot of information. We'll try and get through it, and I'll try and explain it in a clear fashion. But there may be a lot of questions, and we may have to, or probably have to, review it again just to get everything straight, because there's a lot of variables. But first, just on the last subject of not bar not, Nasan Tam bar Nasan Tam, using the parav. So the fellow that works in the Svarim store in town sent me a picture of this new refrigerator magnet called Perfectly Parav. All you need to know to stay parav by Rabbi Tzvi Silverman. I don't know who he is. So I picked one up. This is it. It's interesting, actually. It's got all the variations of what you'd start with, like meat food, parav food. You're doing it, grilling it in a meat grill, or etc. etc. And then it tells you at the end, if it says it's got green is mutter, red is also, yellow is in the middle. Pretty much everything that we discussed is on here. I'm not I'm not getting paid for pushing this at all. It's an interesting thing. I'm not a chart guy myself. My brain doesn't. I don't know if my brain works at all. My brain certainly doesn't work with charts. So, but it might be helpful anytime you go to the Judaica store, check it out, and it could be helpful. There's, as with anything, sometimes books, what you read in books and what people put out for public, sometimes they have to be a little bit more strict because people may misunderstand. So, but most of everything that we learned is on this paper. Again, I didn't look through everything, so I can't say I agree with everything or not, but it seems to be, from what I looked at it a little bit, seems to be pretty good. Okay, so that being said, I just want to discuss one more confusion that people get confused about, and that's what's going on with the OUDE. It just comes up a lot, so I think it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to discuss, because the main question that bothers people is, it says on a packaging dairy free or no dairy, it's okay for lactose intolerant people, and etc. And the OU puts on it OUD. Now the OU, you can call them and they will tell you whether it's DE or not, because the OU decided many years ago not to put dairy equipment. They just marked anything in dairy equipment as D. I think they're rethinking it. They're starting to put on DE, but you just call them, and even on the search, there's a search engine that they have that now you can ask if it's dairy equipment or not, and it'll tell you. But if you're not sure, you have to call the OU. The point is that even if it says dairy free on it, that does not mean that according to halacha, it's dairy free, because what the government and what the FDA considers dairy free and what halacha considers dairy free are two different things. I'll just tell you one or two small examples. So a lot of times what it comes up is the dairy, and then people use this for cooking or for coffee. The coffee made, I don't know the brands. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know exactly the brands, but the non-dairy creamers. So sometimes it's got an OUD. So there's something called caseinate. which is according to the government is not dairy, and according to halacha, at least according to the most kashrus agencies, I'm not saying everybody agrees with the kashrus agencies, but most of the kashrus agencies consider it pure dairy. Basically, what they do is they pull out the properties of dairy, so therefore anybody that's lactose intolerant won't have a problem, but it's still halachically considered dairy. So that's why you may see from the OU that they're still calling it dairy, even though it says dairy free. But you can call the OU, and they're very open. They're very open about it. Another thing is you have it with the rice stream or those type of things, almond milks and stuff like that. So sometimes they will have an OUD, and people don't see any dairy in the ingredients. That doesn't mean anything. It can very well be that it's actual dairy. It can make a big difference if you're baking a cake or something like that for dessert, and there's actual dairy in it, or meaning even though on the packaging it doesn't say it, but if there is actual dairy in it, you could run into problems. So you can never assume that there's no dairy in it if it doesn't say on the ingredient panel. You must call the OU or whoever gives the hechsher on it. But that being said, if it does come back as it's dairy equipment, then we've already discussed, then dairy equipment is no problem. Certainly, it's no problem to have it for dessert, something on dairy equipment like an Oreo. Let's call an Oreo. An Oreo you do not have to call the OU for. It's pretty well known that the basic Oreo products are dairy equipment. They're not actual dairy, and therefore you are allowed to use Oreos in recipes for foods, for desserts that are not going to be eaten directly with meat. So even side dishes, if people will not eat it in the same bite as meat, and certainly with desserts, when you don't eat it in the same bite as meat, so then you're going to be perfectly fine with Oreos and anything else that's OUD. You just have to call or email the OU. They're very good about it. Snyder's pretzels. There's a whole list. Of which Snyder's pretzels are dairy and which ones are dairy equipment. I have the list somewhere, but you just ask the OU or email the OU and they'll tell you. Yeah. So, but many of them are only DE. Now there are some people. I myself personally do not eat DE because of the Chol Yisrael issue. My family does eat DE. I do believe nether, but I try not to. Yeah. So that's my own stringency. If it has any trace of dairy, I'm reading a question now. If it has any trace of dairy, should it have an allergy warning anyway? No, not necessarily. Sometimes it's with the FDA has figured out that there'll be no allergy warning. It does not require an allergy warning because it doesn't have dairy. It will not have any of the qualities of dairy, and still halacha will call it dairy. I'll tell you a story that happened with my own kids. There's something called, I forget what it is, some sort of granola bar that had an OUD on it. And my kids looked at the ingredient panel. I think it was over a weekend, so the OU wasn't answering. So they looked in the ingredient panel and there was no dairy in it. And they went and they searched online, and the company advertises that they put nothing from animals. They put nothing from animals into their product. So my kids came to me and said, "Look, it must be that it's got to be dairy equipment because they claim on the website that they don't put anything from animals in there." So then I called a friend of mine who works for the OU, and you can't even believe this. This is just why you can't trust anything. He says, yeah, he starts laughing. He says, yeah, that company doesn't put anything dairy into their products because they buy the chocolate chips from a different company that does put dairy in it. So when they write on the website that they don't put dairy in it, that is true. They don't put the dairy in it. Another company who they buy the chocolate chips from does put in the dairy. So therefore, even though on their website it says that they don't put any dairy into it, yeah, but they buy it from somebody else who does put dairy into it, and therefore it's complete dairy, even though there's no dairy on the ingredients. Obviously, it's very minute amount of dairy, but it's still, it just shows you, what you can believe about advertising, what companies write on their websites. I don't know if this applies to all non-dairy creamers. There are some that are going to be okay. You have to ask a shaila on each individual one. I don't know anything about Hechsherim. I just happen to have some friends that work for the OU, so I get to hear some of the things, but I'm not up to date. Some of the Oreos, yes, are dairy. There's a list from the OU of which ones are and which ones are not. I don't know if they email it out or not to the public, but if you call them, they'll tell you. They're very open about it. Correct. You cannot just check the ingredients and they say no dairy, because halachically, like I just said with the story with the chocolate chips, and also halachically, there can be. I don't want to get into this. It could be a whole separate share. If there's interest in it, I can go through all the different shilas that come up with. A lot of it also has to do just okay. I'll just say it for just so it shouldn't be confusing. A lot of it, you can have orange juice. From what I understand, there are orange juices that are dairy. How do you get an orange juice to be dairy if it says 100% juice? The reason why it's dairy is because they pasteurize the juice. They're pasteurizing the juice in the same pasteurizer that they use for milk. So you're going to say, okay, so it's dairy equipment. That's possible, but it really depends on how they do the pasteurization. Because sometimes the pasteurization, even though it doesn't have any dairy in it, halachically it can be considered real dairy, not dairy equipment. So that's why you need to just ask the OU. Right. So if you keep Chol of Yisrael, you may not be able to drink the non-dairy creamers. The interesting thing is that even the non-dairy creamer, even if there's milk in it, it's only a couple of percent, maybe. Meaning shishim, batul b'shishim is 1.6%, give or take. So of the dairy creamer, it's only a real small amount of it that's milk. When you take that dairy creamer and you add it to a coffee, it's no question that the dairy part of the creamer becomes nullified in the entire coffee. So even if you keep Chol Yisrael and if you take an OUD dairy creamer that has dairy in it and you add it already to a coffee, your coffee is going to be considered parav because it's batul. The only question is, can you do it on purpose? So doing it on purpose, you wouldn't be able to do. However, if you're by family who doesn't keep Chol Yisrael and they use the dairy creamer and they already put it into the coffee, then there's no reason why you can't drink the coffee. I hope I'm being clear with that. But anyways, okay, but this is not an OUDE share, just because it comes up a lot when people are asking about the dairy equipment. So then you just have to make sure you ask the Kashrus agencies, because it gets very, very complicated, meaning complicated on their end, for the Kashrus agencies. Okay, moving on. So moving on. Now, what we'll try and discuss over the next couple of weeks, Bez Hashem, are basically how to use a microwave at work where it may be treif. How do you use, if you only have one microwave, how to use it for milchiks and fleishiks? How to use ovens for milchiks and fleishiks or milchiks and parav, like we've been discussing. What about countertops? How does it work with Airbnbs using the ovens there, or stovetops? How about warming something up in a not kosher, meaning when there's not kosher being warmed up at the same time, specifically airplanes, like eating airplane food, etc. Those type of things. Feel free to ask when for things that come up. Now, we'll start the sugya. It involves a lot of things. I know I'm making it sound like it's complicated, but it's really not so complicated. Yes, okay, somebody just texted. In that case, you could put a minute amount of milk and coffee when you're fleishiks. Really? if the coffee will be, if you're fleishiks and you made a coffee by mistake and you put some milk into the coffee and that coffee has the 60 times more water than whatever little milk you made, then yes, you can drink that milk. They can drink that coffee even when you're fleishiks. Yes, 100%. You can't do it on purpose, but if it was done already, then you're allowed to. Yes, we know that anything we've discussed in the last couple of weeks, I think, well, not last week, but before that, that anything that's nullified in 60 is kosher. So even tray falls into your coffee, if it's bottle, which bittul means 60, bottle is 60, then it's going to be mutter lechatchila. It's mutter lechatchila to have it. So certainly, when it's kosher milk and the coffee's kosher, it just happens to be that you're fleishiks, and by mistake you put a little bit of milk, so then you're allowed to have it. Now, I think if it's a standard coffee cup, it would have to be a very small amount of milk. But if it's a very, very large coffee cup, and you didn't put in too much milk, and it was bottled b'shishim, it was nullified in 60, then yes, even though you're fleishiks, you'd be able to drink the coffee. Again, you can't do it on purpose, but yes, you'd be able to drink the coffee. Okay, so going back to what we're discussing. So again, using things, let's start with steam. I think we left off with this. So let's go back to it just to get acclimated again. So we said that if you're putting, let's say, the most common case is if somebody's making a hot chocolate, which is a dairy hot chocolate, and they want to add hot water from the urn into the hot chocolate. So we said that when you add the coffee, so now not the coffee, I'm sorry, when you add the water, it makes the steam go up into the spout of the urn. So we said that if the steam is boiling hot by where it hits the spout, I mean, not boiling hot's too hot. If it would be 108 degrees, when it hits the spout, that will make the spout dairy, right? Or if you were putting it into cholent, adding hot water to your cholent, if you're doing it the correct way because of Hilchos Shabbos, but you put the cholent under the urn, and it was boiling hot. Now again, I keep saying boiling hot. I mean 108 degrees. When that steam hit the spout, then it's considered your coffee your urn would be considered fleishiks. Right, now what's the reason? Fleishiks didn't touch it. It was just steam. So the halach is very clear that zeya, which is steam that comes out of food, has the same status as food. Right? So even though the actual food didn't touch it, but if the steam touched it, then the steam coming from the food touched it, and that has the same status of the food, and therefore it will make whatever it is that the steam touched, again, as long as it's 108 degrees, it will make it have the status of whatever it is that touched it. That's why a pot cover, let's say, when does a pot cover actually touch the food, right? So you're cooking cholent, and you have the glass that's on top of the cholent, right? So when does the actual cholent touch that glass? It doesn't usually. Yes, some could drip on it, but for the most part, it doesn't. So that glass is 100% considered fleishiks, even though actual cholent didn't touch it. It's the steam that comes out of the food makes the cover into fleishiks. Right now, you go take that cover, and Motzei Shabbos, you put it on top by mistake. You put it on top of your milchik pasta, and now you have a problem because the zeya, the steam that go again. Zeya is not necessarily steam, but we're going to call it steam for clarity's sake. So the steam that from the cholent that went into the pot cover made the pot cover fleishiks, and now the steam from the dairy went into the pot cover. Again, you took a fleishik pot cover from the cholent that you used on Shabbos day. I'm saying that specific example because it was a ben yomiv, which means that the taste coming out of it is a good taste. And then you went and covered your pasta with it. So now the steam from the pasta goes up into the cover of the cholent pot, mixes in with it, and then the steam drops back down from the pot cover back into the dairy pasta. So now you have treif. Now you have treif pasta. That's that would be your classic example of Zaya making things treif, right? Baruch Hashem, that's not such a common question, although it does happen. People by mistake put it on there, but that would be a problem. Now, that's the reason why that's a problem is because it's very close proximity, meaning the pot cover to the food is usually very close, and it's on the fire, right? So therefore, the steam is very hot. But again, if the steam does not get to 108 degrees, then it's not a problem. So we discussed a couple of weeks ago, and I experimented with this. I let some hot water out of the urn, and I put my hand right next to the spout, and I was able to leave my hand there the whole time. So since I was able to leave my hand there the whole time, therefore it cannot make your spout fleishiks or milchiks. So it would have to be very, very hot. I'm assuming if you have a pot of pasta on the stove top, and there's steam coming out of there, I'm assuming you would not be able to leave your hand there at wherever at the level of where the pot cover is. I'm assuming you wouldn't be able to leave your hand there. If you would be able to leave your hand there, then that truth is, then the pot cover is probably not going to become dairy or meat. But I would doubt that could possibly be. Also, when it's a pot cover, it constricts the zaya, so it has no place for it to go. So therefore, it's going to be much hotter than if you just took off the pot cover, left your hand there, because the steam can go out to the sides, which also makes a big difference halachically. Since it go out to the sides, it cools off. But when you have a pot cover, then it cannot cool off. Okay, so what does this have to do with what we're discussing? So it has a lot what to do with what we're discussing, and I'll just say something that may sound like a joke, but it's not really a joke. I think in my life I only had somebody ask this question to me once. But how come the ceiling in your dining room or your kitchen is not treif? Right, this is just to bring out the point. Meaning, when you're sitting at your table, so then you take out a cholent, let's say, and you take off the cover, and the steam goes up. So maybe it goes up to the ceiling. Fine. Now, Motzei Shabbos, you're having your pasta with cheese, and you open up the cover, and the steam goes up to the ceiling, and now the steam comes down, and now your food is treif. So I think we all know the answer to that question, which is that it doesn't get hot enough by the time the steam reaches the ceiling. I don't even think it reaches it, but even theoretically it did reach it, it's not hot enough to make your ceiling fleishiks, right? So that's fairly straightforward. The question is, how about inside your oven? Okay, how about inside your oven? Or, okay, let's go with the oven first. What about inside your oven? Does it get hot enough on the top of your oven in order to make steam or not? Okay, so you think, well, I would think so. The oven is very hot and it cooks things, right? And when you're cooking and it's in a constricted, enclosed area, so therefore I would assume that the steam goes up to the roof of the oven. So that could be. The problem is that nobody was inside an oven. This is also a joke. I don't think anybody stayed inside an oven in order to see how hot it gets on the roof of the oven, right? But the assumption would be that it does. However, when you open an oven door, you don't see any steam, or you look in the window, if you can look through the window of your oven, you see nothing coming out of what you're cooking. You don't see steam. For the most part, you don't see steam. Sometimes when you open the oven, so the cold air comes in and makes steam. But when you open the oven, you don't usually see too much steam, if at all. That's one. Two is our ovens are vented, which can make a different halachic issue, which we'll discuss in a minute. but our ovens vent, right? And there's always a place for the hot air from the oven to escape. So since there's a place for the hot air from the oven to escape, could very well be that the taste from the foods that you're cooking in the oven do not touch the ceiling of the oven because they sort of get sucked out by the vent that's coming out of the oven. All ovens nowadays vent. Most of them vent through the back, meaning if you have an oven that has the temperature and the controls, right? So under that, if you put your hand there, you'll feel a lot of heat coming out when the oven is on. So many vent out of that, and some vent out from the burners on top. In the burn, there's holes going through there, and they burn. They come out through the burners. Now, why do you have to know this? Because if you know that you're cooking meat inside your oven, and you have only one oven, it might be wise not to keep any dairy pots near that vent because you could have hot air coming out, going straight onto your dairy pot or onto your parrot pot. Now, it could very well be that it's not hot enough. You'd have to keep your hand there and experiment, but it would be a wise idea not to do that. So that's just a parenthetical point. Now, getting back to us. So now the question is, if the heat does not get hot enough to absorb the zaya in the oven, then you'd be able to use your oven for meat and dairy with no problem. You'd be able to alternate no problem because it's not getting hot enough for the food to get absorbed in the top of the oven. So, and there are some poskim that do say that our ovens, meaning this whole oven issue, with the taste going into the roof of the oven and not, was pertained to the ovens in the old days, like we're talking about hundreds of years ago, not before they had gas ovens and electric ovens. But nowadays, once they have things that are vented and also they're insulated very well, so therefore there's very little steam, and therefore they would say that you're allowed to even cook meat and milk in the same oven, alternate back and forth. That is not the popular psak, but there are chashuva poskim that do go with those opinions. We're not going to say that, although if it's necessary, you certainly can rely on that. We're going to say we're going to be concerned that the zaya does go up into the roof of the oven, and therefore you should not use your oven for both dairy and meat, alternating between back and forth. We'll get to exactly how you can do it, but we're going to assume that there is some form of taste that gets absorbed in the roof of the oven. Again, with this, you have to know for your own oven. If you broil in the oven, sometimes you see the steam, but that's usually once you open the oven door, and that's when the cold air hits the hot air. But okay, sometimes you could, but even a lot of times, if you see that steam, it's a minimal amount of steam. So a minimal amount of steam is not going to be a problem. The back of your stovetop gets very hot when the oven is on. It could very well be, but you can feel the steam coming out. If you feel around, you should be able to feel like the hot air coming out of it. I guess I'm not in my kitchen now, so I can't. I'm not going to go in there and make everybody dizzy while I show the video. But basically, let's use my phone as an example. So if this would be the temperature dials on the top, right under here, if you look, you'll see vents there. The reason why I know about this is because the first time I made Pesach and I was covering the back with foil, I didn't know about the vent, so I covered the vent. Therefore, it had no place for the heat to go out, and it burned my whole top of my oven, and I needed to get a whole new control board, which was okay. You learn from your mistakes, and that's why I'm saying it over now to let everybody know so they don't have to have that problem, right? But basically, yeah, it could very well be that it's getting hot. I'm assuming it's from the vent if it gets that hot, but I don't know for sure. But anyways, so now let's understand something very simple. If your food is covered, then there's no steam coming out of it. So, for example, if you cooking, again, it's really, I think, I'm no cook, so, but warming things up, as far as I understand, most things that get warmed up in in when they're covered, right? So if you're warming something up that's covered, then there's no steam coming out, because the steam that's coming out of the food is going into the cover, which is an inch or two above above the food, and then there's no steam getting into the top of the oven, right? So therefore, if I let's say this is a common thing, I go to an Airbnb for Shabbos, and I want to use their oven, and everything I cooked at home, and all I'm doing is warming up, and it's going to be covered by, let's go with a 9 by 13 disposable tin, covered with foil or covered with a tin cover, then there is no Zaya issue in that oven, because how's it going? The Zaya is all trapped within that pan, and since it's trapped within that pan, there's no way. Meaning, even if the day before you there was a guy cooking a beef stew inside the oven, and the steam was going up into the top of the oven, that's all fine. But now, when you're cooking something in that oven, it's covered. If it's covered, it doesn't need anything. It doesn't need kashering, because that oven is blocking the pot cover or the pan cover is blocking any sort of zaya, right? Meaning, it's no different than going to an Airbnb, and let's say you brought your own oven, your own microwave oven to an Airbnb, and you cook something in your own kosher microwave, and you take it out and you put it on the kitchen table, right? You're not going to say now that, oh, maybe the ceiling's trafe because yesterday somebody had trafe in here, because obviously there's no way for the taste. Even theoretically, the person put meat onto the ceiling. Okay, they threw hot meat onto the ceiling, so the ceiling in your Airbnb is trafe. But if you take out a pot that's covered, or even if it's uncovered, and the taste doesn't get up to the ceiling, so then there's no way for the taste to transfer. Therefore, you're going to be okay, right? Yes, so that's exactly what somebody just posted. Therefore, you do not need to double cover in an Airbnb oven. One cover is going to be enough. Right now, I'll explain to you where I think the double cover comes from. Well, one reason we're not going to have time tonight to discuss it, but next week, Bez Hashem, we'll discuss it. But yes, the reason you have to know why you're double covered. The main reason why you would need to cover if you're cooking something in a treifa oven is because you want to block the zaya. To block zaya, all you need is one cover, right? So since all you need, because that blocks the zaya, there's no point in having two. There's absolutely no point in having two covers. If you want to cover the second time to make sure that it's covered well, because I'm not going to tell you not to, but there's really no reason to have it double covered. Where you would need to have it double covered is if you're cooking something in an oven at this. Well, I'm sorry, it wouldn't need a double cover. In this situation, you wouldn't need a double cover either. But, well, I just want to make sure I say this over as clear as possible. Okay, where you would need a double cover is if you're cooking something in a trafe oven and somebody is cooking trafe in the oven at the same time. I don't know when you'd have this situation. There's only one time that really people have this situation, which we'll get to, but you really only need a double cover when somebody's cooking open trafe in the oven at the same time as you. Then you would need a double cover. Now, I'll tell you exactly where this situation comes up. When you fly to Eretz Yisrael, because that's about the only time now that they give hot meals. When you fly to Eretz Yisrael and you want to take the airline meal, right? So when you take out the package, it says that the package is double covered, and if one of the covers is broken, then you should not eat it. You need to have it double covered. The reason for that is because there is a possibility that in the ovens that are on the plane, they're cooking open treif at the same time. So now basically what's going on. So let's say you have these small little ovens in those kitchens on the planes, and you have your treif that's liquidy, and it's going up into the ceiling of the oven. And now that taste comes back down. If your food only has one cover, that taste comes back down and touches your cover, and that makes your cover treif. And now your cover is hot, that's treif, is touching the food that's under it on the other side. And therefore, now your food is treif. Again, let's be clear. They took treif of food. Imagine in your own kitchen. Let's just use your own kitchen as an example. You have your cleaning lady decides she wants to warm up her food in your oven, and she opens it, she cooks it open without any cover. And you have your single covered chicken cooking in there at the same time. Now, obviously, this is not a normal situation, but let's say that's the situation. So now her open meat is going to hit the stovetop, and then the taste is going to come down into your pot cover, your pan cover, makes it treif, and now your pan cover is touching the chicken, and now that's going to make your chicken treif. Right? That's essentially what would go on. So now what you do is you put two covers. So now what should two covers help? Right? Meaning, so now you have two covers. So okay, so it makes the outside cover treif, and then that cover is touching the cover under it, and that makes that cover treif, and then it makes you food treif. So what does double cover help you? And this comes on to the probably one of the most important rules in Hilchos Kashrus that comes up. Many people don't understand it. We'll discuss it a little bit now, and then we will, Bez Hashem, discuss it more next week, because it can be confused. I mean, it's not confusing. The truth is, but it's just it takes time to digest it. No pun intended. This halacha. I'll say it over in Lashon Kodesh first, and then explain it. Basically, the rule is as follows: Ein belia yotzem ekli lekli beloy roitiv. I'll say it again slowly, but then I'll say it in English. You don't really need to know the Hebrew, but it's ein belia yotzem ekli lekli beloy roitiv, or beli roitiv. Ein belia means absorption does not transfer from one pot to another pot unless there's liquid in between the two pots. Okay? This is a rule like we discussed a few weeks ago. If you're going to want to know these halachas, you're going to have a lot of betachon in the knowledge of the chachamim and the chachamim's knowledge of science. Because I don't know how they knew this. But basically what we're going to say is as follows. I have this seltzer bottle full of fleischiks, boiling hot fleischiks. I then have a cup full of boiling hot milchiks. Okay, now I'm not in an oven, just right here, just like this. Again, boiling hot fleischiks, boiling hot milchiks. I touch them together. Okay, and they're boiling hot. The halacha says that the tastes will not transfer from this one to this one unless there's liquid in between the two. Like right here where there's a little space, I don't know if you can see it. If that would be liquid, then the taste would transfer from this to this and make everything treif. But if there's no liquid in between, then taste cannot transfer from one metal to another metal. Okay? This is the halacha. Everybody agrees to this halacha. So, therefore, when you have something double covered and the same oven as treif, right? So again, let's go back to the cleaning lady making her open treif in your oven. So, no, it's inside the oven too. This is somebody just posted. This is inside the oven too. It doesn't make a difference. It can be or both on a stovetop, both in an oven. You have two pots, one milchiks, one fleischiks, touching each other just like this, boiling hot, and it continues to stay hot. Or even if you put it, let's say, onto a campfire, you take potato with cheese and put it in foil, and you put it into the fire, and then right next to it you have a steak inside foil. You put them right on top of each other. The tastes will not transfer from one to the other. I know it sounds a little wild, but that is exactly what's going on in the airplanes, right? When again, if you have open a trafe in the oven, and what it's going to do, it's going to hit the roof. It's going to go down into the roof and hit your outside cover of your airplane meal. Now, you say, okay, so it hits the outside cover, so the outside cover became trafe. Fine. Now there's another cover inside. Why isn't that becoming trafe? So the reason why that's not becoming trafe is because of the rule that we just said, that taste from one metal pot or any metal, from one metal to another metal, does not penetrate unless there's liquid in between. And the assumption is that in your airplane food, there's no liquid in between the first cover and the second cover. Therefore, it blocks, two covers blocks any sort of taste transferring. I hope that's clear. If it's not clear, please post it. I should explain it again. So again, when you have something double covered, it will protect the food that's inside. So let's use another extreme example. You're warming up food in your oven. Let's say you're warming up chicken in your oven, boiling hot chicken in the oven, and for whatever reason you decided to put two covers on top of your pan of your chicken. And then comes along somebody and decides to take a piece of pizza and put it right down on top of your pan of chicken. But for whatever reason, a nace happened and you decided that day to put two covers instead of one. Your chicken will be 100% kosher and your pizza will be 100% kosher. I know you try that at home and nobody's going to do this. Nobody's going to eat it. But that is the halacha, right? That is the halacha. And again, because we say that taste does not transfer between two metals, right? So again, this doesn't necessarily apply to us in the day-to-day, but that's where the concept of double cover comes from. So now going back to our question, why wouldn't you have to double cover the food that you're making in an Airbnb? The answer is because you don't have trafe cooking in your Airbnb oven at the same time, right? All you have is kosher. So as long as there's no zaya coming out and hitting the oven, which there isn't because your food is covered, therefore you're okay. Now, glass would be the same as metal. Yes, and aluminum foil will be the same thing. The only question is, and this does come up, is parchment paper considered, does parchment paper have the same din? Some parties can say parchment paper is meant for taste to go through it. So therefore parchment paper wouldn't say that. Like I'll tell you, Shiloh, somebody asked me last week, they by mistake, I don't know if they did it on purpose or by mistake, but they took a dairy Betty Crocker, what do you call those things? Pizza maker that had some pieces of cheese still, the old burnt pieces of cheese. And they put down parchment paper, and then they put bread in there to defrost. So the question was, does the parchment paper block the taste of the dairy from going through to the bread? So because it was parchment paper, I told them it's better to consider it dairy, even though there are those that would say that the parchment paper does block the taste from going. But it's everything else other than parchment paper will block it. So again, going back to this, and let's bring it to a more practical example. You have one oven, and this is the most common. You just baked your chicken in the oven on Friday afternoon, and now you decide you want to put in fish, right? Can you put in the fish into the oven, or is that cooking fish in something that's meat? So if what you cooked Well, we're going to allow it anyways, even if it was open, because it's fish and meat, which is much more lenient. But let's just use as an example. So you cooked your meat and your meat was covered, or your chicken was covered, and now you want to cook your fish that's covered. It's not a problem, right? Because there was, and you don't need to double cover because it's not in there at the same time. But theoretically, if you wanted to cook meat and milk in the oven at the same time, so then what you would have to do is you have two options. Either cover the meat once and cover the dairy once, and then there's no problem because there's no zaya coming out. But if you need to cook the dairy open and you want to cook the fleischiks closed, then you would need two covers. Again, that example is not so common. I don't know too many people that are cooking or heating up dairy and meat in the oven at the same time. But yes, the same way we do it on a plane, you do it on a in your own house, right? I hope we're being clear with this. Now, double cover means it has to be, and somebody's asking this. Double cover does not mean taking foil and wrapping it around twice. That's one cover, because what's going to happen is the taste is going to go into the foil and make its way around your double foil. So that will not work. Again, like I said, we have to have betachon in amunas chachamim, in their knowledge of the science. It doesn't work if it's one long foil double wrapped. You'd have to cut the foil. Once you cut the foil, then you make it two separate pieces. Then that's considered a double cover, right? And also does not have to be fully covered. I mean, it should be as covered as well as it can, but if some steam escapes, it's going to be a minimal amount, then you're going to be fine. Same thing with the microwave, right? In the microwave, somebody asked about the microwave, I think, before. So it depends how many air vents it has. If it has a couple of air vents, then it's not going to be a problem. If it has a lot of air vents, then it would be better to get one that doesn't have air vents. Right? Now I think we're saying a lot of information here. I hope it's being clear, and we'll wrap it up with this. No pun intended on that one either. But again, what we're saying. So somebody's asking, is it a problem to cook meat uncovered in an oven that just had uncovered fish? That's not a problem. You can even have fish cooking in an oven at the same time as long as one of them is covered. But that's for a little bit of different reason, because you're not allowed to have meat and fish together because of sakana. We say that doesn't apply to absorption in utensils, meaning according to halacha, you do not need a separate fish pot. Some people have a minhag to have a separate fish pot. That's not halacha. Halacha does not require a separate fish pot, because it's only a sakana to eat fish and meat together if you're actually eating the actual food together. If it's just the taste of the food, meaning you cooked meat in a pot and now you wash the pot, the only issue is, and I think we discussed this a few weeks ago, whether the taste coming out is a problem. There is no sakana of taste of meat getting into fish, or the taste of fish going into meat. So therefore, you're allowed to cook fish in a meat pot as long as it's clean, and you're allowed to cook fish in a meat oven right after meat was cooked, and even at the same time, as long as one of them was covered. Okay, so let's just review what we're saying here. That zaya from food, that thing, meaning this steam, let's call it steam for lack of a better word, steam that comes out of food has the same status as the food. However, you have to make sure that the food has steam coming out of it. That's A, which we haven't really discussed yet. But certainly if your food that you're baking is covered, then that will certainly block steam from coming out. So therefore, if you wanted to warm something up or heat something up in a treif oven that doesn't have any treif in it and it's covered, then you're allowed to do that 100%. The same thing is when you want to heat up fleischiks in a milchik oven or milchiks in a fleischiks oven. Really all you need is one cover, because it's blocking the zayah. And once it blocks the zayah, it blocks the steam from going out. There's nothing, there's no way for the taste to transfer. And then we said the major yisoid of Hilchos Kashrus is that, and this is where all the covering comes from, is that ein bli yotz mikli lekli b'layrativ, which means that the taste from one utensil to another utensil doesn't transfer unless there is liquid there, right? So therefore, when you really want to think about it, that's why for those that have only one stovetop and they use it for both milchiks and fleishiks, that's because we don't cook milchiks and fleishiks straight on the stovetop. It's always in a pot. So therefore, there is no pot. There's no taste transfer. Let's say you have the grates of your stovetop, and in the morning you cooked eggs with cheese, right? So that pot is going to be a dairy pot. Okay, so why didn't it make your oven grate, your stovetop grate, milchiks? The reason is because the taste cannot go from your milchik frying pan into the oven grate because there's no liquid in between. So therefore, your oven grate remains parv. Now, for lunch, you want to go cook a hamburger or whatever on a fleishik frying pan, no problem, because the grate is parv, since there was no way for the taste to transfer from the pot into the grate. All right, so that's basically what we have. In addition to that, you also have the fire that burns up any taste anyways. Now, just one more thing. We don't want to rely on ein bli yotz mikli lekli b'layrativ lechatchila, even though there are those that say you can, but we don't want to do this lechatchila, which means you don't want to. I used an example of heating up milchiks in a covered pan in the same time as an oven with fleishiks in a pan. If you did it, it's 100% kosher. But there's a concern that maybe the cover will come off and the food will overflow, which happens. And then then there is going to be liquid in between the two pans. So since there's a concern for that, the poskim don't want us doing this lechatchila. But that's only if there's milchiks and fleishiks in the oven at the same time. If they're not at the same time, then that's not going to be an issue. But again, we'll discuss this Be'ez Hashem next week. We're just laying the groundwork, and hopefully it wasn't confusing enough, and people will come back for that. But those are the basic two rules, that if something's covered, it blocks any zayah, and there's no taste transfer for sure b'di'evet, and depending on the situation, even l'chatchila, from one metal to another metal. So if anybody has any other questions, they could post it now, please. So when you're double wrapping the pan of food, can you just double wrap the cover, or does the entire thing have to be double covered? That's an excellent question. Really, only the top should be double covered. However, let's say it's a treif oven, and for some reason, like we just discussed, you're warming up, a chicken with a lot of liquid, and then for some reason the cover, gets lifted up, and the liquid bubbles out, and it comes down the side of the pan, goes under the pan, and now the treifa grate has liquid in between it and the kosher pot, and now the taste transfers. So because of that, you'd want to double cover the bottom too, which you don't really have to double cover. Just lay down some foil, and that would be fine. B'di'evet, it's not going to be a problem anyways, because the assumption is that nobody cooked treif directly on the grates. Most of the time, they're also cooking in a pot, right? That's what changed. Modern way of cooking is in pots. The modern way of cooking is with pots. In the old days, they would just put the food straight onto the metal. So that's why it was much more complicated. Nowadays, we cook everything in pots. So therefore, there's very little transfer of taste. So that's but there's only a concern. So what your concern is that you double cover. So should you double cover a milchik food in a meat oven? If the oven's clean, there's no reason to double cover. You can just single cover. If you want, like we just discussed, put down a foil on the bottom of your pan in case for whatever reason the pan um, bubbles over. So it really, if there's a solid in there, then that's not really a concern either. Yes, it's. I want to be clear here. What's the popular psak that people say is that the food has to be double covered. Halachically, it's not necessary to do, again, unless you're cooking meat and milk in the oven at the same time, which we said lechatchili you shouldn't do anyways, or it's treif in the oven at the same time, like somebody goes to the hotel and asks the hotel to warm up the food for them, or on a plane, etc., etc. But because of that, it became accepted that when you're cooking something meat in a milk oven or vice versa, that you double cover. In halachically, it really does not need a double cover. If you use a double cover till now, I would say I continue using a double cover. But really, it's really not necessary. The double cover is only when it's really necessary, when you know that there's open milchiks in the oven at the same time, then the double cover is really required. I hope I'm being clear. I hope I'm not being too confusing, because we haven't even gotten to the challah and open foods that themselves don't necessarily have zayah, right? Meaning sometimes you look at a food and there's no steam that comes out of it, like challah. When you're baking challah, would you have to cover it? Can you bake a challah in a fleishik oven and then eat it with milchiks, etc., etc.? But it's late already, so we'll get back to that as Hashem next week, and we'll review this. We'll review this again. Okay, so we'll stop over there. Let's just say a perek of Tehillim. Pei Gimel is usually the one that we say. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, Pei Gimel. Shim is Malo Asaf. Elim al damilach atachrash vatishkoid el ki inei oyevecha yeman. Masanecha nasaroish alamcha yirim usayid yisayat zoal tzvanecha. Amru l'chu v'nachidem v'gavi lo yizach Hashem Yisrael oid. Kinoi tzu levi avta v'alecha b'risi chroy so alei adam v'yishmeil v'mayov v'agrim k'ol v'amayim v'amalek peleshes and yosh v'tzor. Gam asher nilva imam ha'Yisrael v'nei lo yitzela selam kimidyon k'sisra k'yovim v'nachal kishay. Nishmedu ve'ein dar ha'yidayim lo adama. Shisemen deveim ekayru v'chazev v'zevach u'chtzamuno kol nesichemoi asher amru nir shalom v'isnois elihim Alei Shiseim Kagalga Kashrus Ruach Keish Tevayor Chalavat La'it Harim Kentir Defem B'Sarecha V'Sifascha Sivalem Alei Finim Kol Mivaksh Shimcha Adonai V'Yaveshu V'Balo Adayad V'Yachur V'Yavedu V'Yedu Ki Ata Shimcha Adonai L'Vadecha Al Yona Kol Haaretz Achinu Kabeis Yisrael Hanasulim B'Sara V'Shivi Ahim D'Mim Yom V'Yim V'Yabasha Hamakim Yirachem Alayim V'Yetzeim Mitzal L'Rocha Me'Yafei L'Lo'ira Mushiva D'Geula Hashtal B'Agalav Zman Kariv V'Nemar Remain. Okay, thank you for listening. If anybody, if it wasn't clear or you think I need to clarify things before next week, Hashem, please let me know, or Mrs. Jacobs, thank you again for arranging. And everybody should have a good tvach, and we should hear only Suras Tavas.